Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to today's Daf Yomi, which is SUKKAH Daf Yutes. We begin 7 lines from the top of the Amid. Says the Gemara, Besura masni l'hoshmata b'hailishna. In the town of Surah, and the yeshiva in Surah, they presented the sugi that we had yesterday, b'hailishna, in the exact manner in which we learned it yesterday. You may recall we discussed a chatzar, which is surrounded with an achsadra. So we have a U-shaped housing complex, configured like a U. Inside there is a chatzar, which happens to be ringed with an achsadra, with an overhang. So from the house there is an overhang, a canopy, some sort of roof, going into the courtyard. So that happens on all 3 sides. And on that airspace, he placed some SUKKAH, which is leaning on the achsadra. So the sukkah now is surrounded on all 3 sides with an achsadra. Now where are the walls? So yesterday we learned that if it so happens to be that there are poles, pitzimin, lining the sukkah, meaning where the achsadra meets the SUKKAH, at that point where they meet, there are poles lined up next to each other, within 3 tvachim to each other. They're there to support the achsadra. So it's at the point where the achsadra and the SUKKAH meet, we have poles, in which case now the sukkah is completely surrounded by these poles, which are within 3 tvachim to each other, within the range of lavud, which is considered a mechitza. So now the sukkah has mechitzas on all 3 sides, and is certainly kosher. We apply lavud to close up the mechitza. So that's yesh la petzimin. When there are no petzimin, so all we have is the achsadra and the SUKKAH leaning on it. And that's happening on all 3 sides. Right? We have achsadra on all 3 sides, a U-shaped achsadra coming out of those houses, and SUKKAH sitting on it. And the question was whether we can apply pi tikra. You see, the achsadra, which is really a roof, has a tikra and has a pi tikra. That forward-facing surface, some say it has to be a tefach thick, a forward-facing surface, a horizontal surface, which is a peh. So when you enter that roofed area, you feel like you're going into a roofed area. That creates a separation. The pi tikra is yered v'soisem, is stretched downward. We learned this from Halachah Meshmesina. Rashi says it's a variation of gud achis. We pull down the mechitza. Tosfos learns in Erev, and Tosfos learns it's a Pesach based concept. So it creates that entranceway and appears like it's a separate area. So since you have this pi tikra on all 3 sides of your sukkah, right, your SUKKAH is resting on that achsadra, and that's happening on all 3 sides, perhaps you will apply pi tikra, yered v'soisim, to enclose your sukkah on all 3 sides. Abaye says yes, and Rava says, well, in this case you can't do that because, keep in mind, the pi tikra is part of the tikra, which is meant to serve what? To service the area underneath that roof. It wasn't meant to serve the sukkah beside it. In which case, Rava maintains you can't apply pi tikra to benefit the sukkah. Perhaps it's a sukkah-based concept because sukkah is an environment, it's a dira which you are creating. And in fact, Rava back in Daf Hey says you need mechitzes nikaros. It has to be visible, tangible. It has to be there to create that mokim of dira. In which case, in this case, it won't apply because the pi tikra is part of the roofed area and servicing the roofed area. It wasn't meant to service the sukkah next to it. So that was the version as presented in Surah. The Surah masni l'hashmata by Lishna. In Surah they learned the sugya the way we just did it. In this version, meaning if it's lavud, it's certainly okay, because although you're servicing the area outside the achsadra, that's okay, because lavud is considered like one and connected. So those poles which are within 3 to each other are considered like one continuous mechitza, and when you have a solid mechitza, it works in both directions. Right? So just as if you have a real solid mechitza, of course it works in all directions. It divides for this side, divides for that side, it benefits everybody involved. Likewise, lavud is a form of mechitza. We consider it like one continuous wall, in which case even the sukkah can benefit from those petzimin which were really there to support the achsadra. The machlekes between Abaye and Rava pertains to pitikra, which is less tangible than lavud. Abaye says it works for the sukkah as well. Rava says, since it wasn't really meant to function as a mechitza for the sukkah, it was meant to function as a divider for the roofed area, to create that impression of separation between the roofed area and beyond. It's servicing the area beneath the roof and not the sukkah, and therefore it doesn't work for the sukkah. However, says the Gemara, Pumbedisa, in the town of Pumbedisa, Masni, they presented this sugya differently. They held that even when it comes to applying lavud, Rava will hold that since it isn't really a tangible mechitza, it's a halachic mechitza, this virtual mechitza can only serve the intended service area, meaning the achsadra which it's meant to come, which it's coming to enclose. But the sukkah alongside it will not benefit from the lavud. So b'pum b'disa masni, they learned as follows: Sichich al gabi achsadra she'ein lo b'tzimin. If you place the schach on the achsadra which happens not to have any poles, in which case you would have to rely on pitikra. Divrei hakoil pesula, all agree it's puzzle. Why? Because the pitikra, which is part of the tikra of the achsadra, was meant to serve the roofed area and not the sukkah alongside it. So everybody agrees it's puzzle. Yesh lo petzimin, but if there are poles ringing that sukkah, lining up the perimeter where the schach meets the achsadra, so we have poles along all the sides, and they're within 3 to each other. We can apply lavud, perhaps. Now we have a machlokes. Abaye amrak sheira. Abaye says it's fine. Why? Because although the poles are there to support the achsadra, to service the roofed area, not necessarily the sukkah, but once you get to lavud, it's closed up. It's a continuous wall. A real wall can benefit both sides. Rava amar psula. Rava says no, it can't serve the sukkah. Explains the Gemara. Abaye maksher amrin lavud. We apply lavud. Rava amar psula lay amrin lavud. Why can't we apply lavud? Because certainly lavud works to enclose the intended enclosed area, the place where it's trying to serve and to enclose. But the sukkah outside of it cannot benefit from that lavud. So according to this version, when it's a real mechitza, of course, there's no question, it works in all directions. When it's just pitikra, where you're stretching down that roof and bringing it down, all agree it's only going to service the intended area, the place where it was meant to serve. The machlokes applies to lavud. Abaye says, well, lavud is like a real mechitza. We ignore the gap, you see a built wall, and it benefits the achsadra, it benefits the sukkah. Rava says, bottom line is, lavud is a halachic concept. You don't have a physical, tangible mechitza, and therefore it can only serve the area which it was meant to enclose, as opposed to the sukkah. And the halacha follows the first version of events, which was that once again, if you have a solid mechitza, of course it benefits everybody. And if you have lavud, we consider that to be a solid mechitza and it affects and benefits everybody. When we have pitikra, then we have a machlokes. Abaye says it works, and Rava says it doesn't. Let's go over to Rashi, about 4 or 5 lines down on your right side. Laho shmat. So in Surah, they had the presentation of this shmata, this machlokes, the Abaye Rava, and that was the way we learned yesterday. In Pumbedisa, they learned differently. So if you have schach resting on an achsadra, which has no poles, so you can't employ lavud, the only thing you can apply is pitikra, divrei kol psula. All agree it doesn't work. They keep in the tikra l'chalal achsadra asuya, because since that roof was meant to cover the achsadra, v'lo lavish shechutzela, it wasn't coming to benefit, to aid the area outside it. Ein pianasa mechitzas la'aver. So the pitikra cannot serve as a mechitza to the area outside that achsadra. So all agree it doesn't work. Yesh la betzimin, But if we have these poles lining the perimeter of the sukkah, where the achsadra meets the schach, and they're set up b'pachas mishloisha, now we have a machlekes. Abayam rakshera, amrina lovet, va'ava b'shabtzimin lachalal achsadra nasu. Although the poles were there to serve the area beneath that roof, beneath the achsadra, not to serve the area outside of it. It still works. Why? They're called pachas mishloisha stimam al yisehi. Anything less than 3 is considered a proper enclosure. V'shade lachalahacha, it can be applied in all directions. V'rava mapsul, no, it's not a physical mechitza, it's a halachic mechitza. The love mechitza he alam halacha l'mesh mesinai gmirila v'echik gmirila lios mechitza lachalal hanasa b'shvilo yasa l'mesh dayi l'asa aval l'mesh dayi lachalachalai. If it's a real physical mechitza, I agree. It works for this side, it divides for that side. But when it's a halachic mechitza, says Rava, the halacha l'mesh Sinai tells you to apply it in the direction where it was meant. It was meant to come and close and come to serve the achsadra, as opposed to the sukkah outside. Where it concludes, we follow the first version, in which case we say, if it's a solid mechitza, of course it works. If it's loved, it works as well. If it's pitikra, it's not as good as loved. And we follow Rava, who says it only works for the achsadra, which was its intended service area, as opposed to the sukkah, which it wasn't really meant to serve. V'loi kilishna basra, we don't follow the second lashon, which is more machmir really, because according to Lishna Basra, even by loved, we make this distinction between the achsadra and the sukkah. We don't follow that shita. Why? Because the loved amrina afilu aver. Because when it comes to loved, since it's so close to each other, we ignore the gap. Consider a proper mechitza, a tangible mechitza which works in all directions. Aval stimas pitikra le'amrina elel chalal. When it comes to pitikra closing, that only works for the roofed area, and not for the sukkah, which is situated alongside it. So bottom line, if we have a real physical mechitza separating 2 areas, of course, both sides of the mechitza can equally benefit from that tangible physical mechitza. It's a barrier. It divides the area into 2. When we have pitikra, at least according to Rava, it doesn't work because it's a halachic mechitza. It's just an appearance of mechitza, and it works for the mokim which it's coming to serve. For instance, the pitikra is going to serve the area under the tikra, to consider it separated from the area beyond it, but it cannot serve the area outside that tikra. It's not a tangible mechitza which can go in all directions. It can enclose the roofed area. So when you're in the roofed area, you consider yourself separated from the area beyond. But as far as the fellow standing outside of that roofed area, he can't really benefit from that mechitza, which isn't really a tangible mechitza. It's not going to serve as a divider as far as he's concerned. When it comes to lavud, that's already a gray area. And that depends on 2 lashonis. According to the second lashon, lavud is considered like pitikra. According to the first lashon, lavud is stronger than pitikra, and the sukkah is considered an enclosed sukkah. Continues the Gemara, Rav Ashi, Ash kechele Rav Kahana. Rav Ashi, notice Rav Kahana, who is building a sukkah, the kamesachech al gabe achsadra, she'en lo betzimin. So he had a sukkah which was shaped like an L. He had 2 walls. And where was the 3rd wall? So he was putting a schach on top of the achsadra. He was building it near the overhang, and there were no poles there. So the question was, where's the 3rd wall? Amrlei, so Rav Ashi asks Rav Kahana, you must be relying on pitikra. Right? He rested the schach on the achsadra, apparently because he was relying on pitikra of the achsadra to serve as the 3rd mechitza for his sukkah. Amalei, Rav Ashi asks him, Lo Yisava Mar Hada Amar Rava? You don't hold of Rava? The Amar Rava Yesh Lo Ptzimin Ksher. If you have poles lining the sukkah, you have poles positioned at the meeting point of achsadra and sukkah, kshera, and your sukkah is lined with poles surrounded with mechitzas. Ein lo ptsimim psula. But otherwise, it's possible you cannot rely on pitikra of the achsadra for the sukkah. Achrile. So Rav Kahana showed him something. He pointed out that there was a third mechitza. And although it wasn't really visible, it's still considered a mechitza. Nira mibifnim, v'shava mibachutz. She showed him that the mechitza was visible from inside the sukkah. When you're standing inside your L-shaped sukkah, you see that third wall. V'shava mibachutz, although it wasn't really seen from the outside, because one standing outside, to him it appeared like it's just a thicker wall. It was maybe a tefach or something, right? That's the third wall. But from the inside it was visible. It was protruding into the sukkah, right? But from the outside, to the outside observer, it would appear like just a thick wall. Inami, or perhaps it was the other way. Nira mibachutz, although the third wall was visible from the outside, v'shavim b'fnim, but not from the inside. So you may want to take a look at the diagram right here in the Gemara. That's a bird's eye view of the whole situation. So beneath that diagram would be the house, and then as you enter the diagram from below, it's the achsadra, it's the overhang. And then you proceed to the L. You see the L-shaped sukkah. Right? It has two walls, but it's more than two walls. You see another little leg sticking out of that L. It's like a tuft. So where the sukkah meets the achsadra, you see that little third wall, but that wasn't seen from inside the sukkah. That's nira mibachutz v'shavim mifnim. One who's standing in the sukkah doesn't notice that third wall. It's only seen from the outside, and according to Rav Kahana, that is sufficient for a sukkah. That creates a separation. It says the Gemara, the Itmar, as we learned elsewhere in Erevin, we have a mavi, an alleyway heading into Rosh Hashanah. In order to allow carrying the mavi, you have to position a lechi, a side post, where the mavi meets Rosh Hashanah. And we learned, nira mibachutz v'shavim mibifnim, even if it's only visible from the outside, but one standing in his mavi will not notice it because the wall just continues straight. It's the lechi on the outside, which will be seen. Nida mishum lechi, we treat it as a lechi because that's enough to create a separation. V'lechi hainu p'tzimen, just as it works by lechi hainu p'tzimen, it works as a p'tzimen, as a sort of a post, as a halachic third wall when it comes to the sukkah. Asks Taisus, Tema, how can you compare the two things? You're comparing mavi where it's only a din d'Rabbanan to create an impression of separateness. So certainly if it's going to be seen from the outside, meaning the Bnei Rosh Hashanah will view that lechi, that's enough to create that separation. Whereas by sukkah you need a third wall. And if it's not going to really be part of your sukkah, when you're sitting in the sukkah, you're not experiencing that third wall, you're not being surrounded by that third wall, what good does it do? Answers Rabbeinu Peretz, he says apparently what happened was that there was a tzuras pesach, like an impression of an entranceway, right? Pole on either side and string on top, at that third side, which minat Torah is sufficient. Although tzuras pesach cannot be applied to the entire enclosure of the sukkah, you need mechitzas and the current tangible mechitzas, as the Ran explains. When it comes to the third wall, which is more lenient, shlishas hafilot tefach, so all the Rav Kahana was machmer. We actually learned it back on that Zayin Amud Aleph, where Rav Kahana was very machmer when it comes to the third wall. He applied a tefach shlishis plus a tzuras pesach. That was a story there in the Gemara. So apparently that's the way he used to build his sukkah. So technically, says Tosfos Rabbeinu Peretz, the tzuras pesach would address the basic requirement. The minat Torah requirement of the third wall, in which case he says once he adds the extra tefach, be it visible from the inside, only visible from the outside, that's enough to create that separation, that completion of that third wall. Says the Gemara, Tana. Now actually this halacha we're going to learn now was mentioned several times in the Masechta Psal Hayotze Min HaSukkah, and finally we're going to get to it. Tana Psal Hayotze Min HaSukkah. Psal means psoilis garden v'yekov, describing the material used for the SUKKAH. So it's Yaitzim Ras Sukkah, it's actually extending out of the Sukkah. Nidan Kesukkah, La Halacha, we consider it as a Sukkah. Now what does this mean? My Psal Hayitzim Sukkah. How exactly do we describe this psal? Amar ula kanim hayotzim lachir sukkah. We're speaking that these kanim, meaning the schach, it sticks out behind the sukkah. So he has one wall on the right, one wall on the left, one wall on the back, and he has kanim sticking out from the back of the sukkah. And that's considered part of the sukkah. V'ba'in and shalish tfanis, you need 3 walls for a sukkah. But the ikka, you have 3 walls. What happened was, initially, he built a huge sukkah, one on the right, one on the left, one on the back. He decided, you know what? I want to get a little economical. I'll make the sukkah a little smaller. And he pushed the back wall into his sukkah. So now he shortened his sukkah. And behind that back wall, you have a fully enclosed area. You have 3 walls, right? You had right, left, and back. And then you push the back one in towards the front. So now the back, behind that back wall, you have an enclosed area. So you have it. V'bein and hechsher sukkah, but you need a shear of 7 by 7 tefachim. B'dika, you have it. V'bein and tzilasim rubim chamasa, you need more shade than sun. B'dika, you have it. If that's the case, it's pashut. Why you discuss it? It's a kasher sukkah. Perhaps there will be room to think that it's no good. Why? Rashi learns, since the walls were intended to serve the enclosed area, rather than the outside of the sukkah, the back side of the sukkah. Certainly the back wall was never meant to serve that area. It was meant to serve the inside of the sukkah. You happen to push it towards the front, you'll have to have some area behind it, but it wasn't meant to serve that area. And the right and left walls as well, initially they were meant to serve an enclosed area. So perhaps it's not going to benefit that area. You can't use those walls. Perhaps those walls are no longer effective for that area, which was out of their domain, out of their realm. Kamash Malan, the Chiddush is it works as well. Asks Taisvis Vikasha. This concept was already taught in the Mishnah back on the Yud Zayin. We had a case where it was a bias. A chotzer, which was mukavas achsad. That was the case we just discussed. A U-shaped courtyard. And the Mishnah tells us if the wall of the house is within striking range, within Deifin Akuma range of the kasher schach, you can use it. What do you mean? The mechitzas of the bias were constructed to serve a sukkah or constructed to serve a house. So you see it works. Why would the Gemara have to repeat the halacha again here? So Taisus learns differently than Rashi. What the Gemara meant was that the schach were meant to serve the actual sukkah itself, not behind the sukkah. And that's the chiddush of the Gemara. Don't think, well, it's not made l'shem tzel, it's just protrusions, extensions of your schach. Chiddush as it works. Now to answer Taisus kasha and Rashi, the Ritva says there wouldn't be a raya necessarily from mechitzas habayis, which are properly constructed walls. And then, it can serve in either direction, whether or not you had that in mind. It's there. It's a permanent structure as opposed to a sukkah, which is a temporary structure. Who says that it can benefit an area which was not part of the plan? So that's the chiddush that it works. So Rav explains, psal yotzim sukkah means you have psal. Psal is going to be some schach sticking out behind your sukkah. And it happens to be an enclosed area, happens to have the shear properly shaded, and it works. Rabbi and Rabbi Yehuda, they had a different pshat. So they both explained as follows. We're speaking that the kanim extend past the entranceway of the sukkah. Umashcha va'azla chad doifim b'hadai. One doif, one wall accompanied that schach. So you have one on the right, a very long one. One on the left, a short one. One on the back. And the schach keeps on going past the entranceway, and there's one wall going along with it. Umashcha va'azla. He's going along with that schach. Chad doifim b'hadai. And the chiddush is you can sit even in that extension. Perhaps you don't have an hechsher sukkah there. Why don't you have hechsher sukkah? The Maharsha explains, it means You don't have 3 defanes. You don't have 3 walls. You only have 1 wall. Kamashvon, the chiddush is it works. And Rashi explains it works like every sukkah, which is 2 walls and a bit. You have one on the right, one on the left, like an L, and you have a little bit here on the left. So inevitably, one wall is longer than the other, and it still works. The entire area is considered enclosed. Here as well. Ask the Mefarshim, so what's the chiddush of the Gemara? This is a standard procedure for every sukkah. So the Rosh explains Rashi as follows. He says it's different. It's different than the small size sukkah of Shtayim Kilchasan and Shlishis Tefach. See, over there, certainly it's all one enclosure. But when it comes to a sukkah where he built a long wall and a back wall, and then another wall on the left, which is more than the required amount. It's more than one tefach. He built a real long wall there. So perhaps he is indicating, well, he's showing that he's not sufficing with bare minimum. Right? He's not just trying to accomplish a halachic wall. He's trying to enclose a sukkah, and he only went up to this point. He went to 5 tachim, 7 tachim, 10, whatever it is that he did. Perhaps that's indicative of the fact that he's only considering the short area as part of his sukkah. So now that he has a longer wall going out, perhaps that's outside of the enclosure, outside of the intended sukkah. That's the chiddush. No, we say it's no different than the standard sukkah of Shtayim Kilchasan, Shlishis Tefach. So although we have a show on the long wall, everything's included in the sukkah. Rabba Babrachan or Rabbi Yehuda. He says, I'll tell you a different pshat in the Bryce. What is Psal Yotzim in sukkah? As follows. Lo Nitzrucha, we're speaking Elul Sukkah Sheruba. Tzilasam Ruba Mechamas. Most of the sukkah is properly shaded. More shade than sun. Umiyuta, however, there's a small part there that's mostly sunny. Chamasam Ruba Mitzilas. More sun than shade. The chiddush is you can sit in that location as well. Maldo Tema, perhaps you would say, Te Pasal Bach Purta. That little spot there, which is sunny, is Pasal Kamash Malon. The chiddush is that it's incorporated into the general sukkah configuration and it's kosher as well. Umayotze, what does the Brisa mean? Psal hayotze. It's not outside the sukkah. It's actually in the sukkah. Yotze mehechsher sukkah. It left the kashrus of the sukkah. It's not properly shaded. And the chiddush is it's considered part of the sukkah as well. Rabbi Yeshe Amar, here comes a fourth pshat in the Brisa. The Brisa is speaking where you have a patch of schach pasel in your sukkah. Pachas mishloisha. B'sukkah ktana, you have a small sukkah and you have less than 3 tefachim of schach pasel. The chiddush is it's also considered part of his sukkah. You consider under that patch. Umay yoytze. What does the Brisa mean? Yoytze. It's not outside the sukkah. It's in the sukkah. Yoytze metorah sukkah. It's outside the Torah of sukkah. You don't even have a proper schach there, and it still works. Maskef la Rav Hoshia. What's the chiddush? Lo yehei ela aver. Even if it's not schach pasel, even if it's a gap, airspace, which is really more strict, more severe, more harmful and dangerous than schach pasel. Right? Generally speaking, let's say by large size sukkah, we say when it comes to avir, even 3 tefachim is no good. When you have schach pasel, you have until 4 tefachim or 4 amis. So what's the chiddush about speaking? What's the chiddush of speaking about schach pasel when the same concept would apply to avir? Lo yehei ela avir. Even if this wasn't schach pasel, it was just airspace. Va'avir pachas m'shleisha tefachim b'sukkah ktana me pasel. If you have less than 3 tefachim of airspace in a small sukkah, does it invalidate the sukkah? So you should have had a greater chiddush in the Bryce. Rather than speaking about schach pasel less than 3, you should have spoken about airspace less than 3. Amalei Rabbi Abba responds, no. There was a specific chiddush that the Bryce wanted to bring out, which explains why the Bryce spoke about schach pasel dafka. Why? There's a difference between less than 3 tefachim of schach pasel and less than 3 tefachim of airspace. How? Zeh mitztaref v'yishenim tachtov. Schach pasel less than 3 tefachim in a sukkah ktana is going to be mitztaref, going to attach itself to the rest of the sukkah, and the sukkah ktana can sort of include the schach pasel in its required area, in its shear of zayin al zayin, v'yishenim tachtav. And guess what? You could actually sleep under the schach pasel. It's batal to the sukkah. And even if he's actually under schach pasel, he knows for a fact, I'm under schach pasel, it's okay. It's been incorporated into the sukkah. And that's what the Bryce is saying, psal yitzim in a sukkah, nidlik sukkah. If you have psal, schach, which is not kosher schach, but if it's less than 3 tefachim, it's part of your sukkah and you can sleep underneath it. However, v'zeh, when it comes to airspace, that's different. It's more chomer, mitztaref. Although it is mitztaref, it joins the rest of the sukkah and it's considered part of the shear of the sukkah because it's less than 3 tefachim. You can just ignore the gap. But that's as far as the sukkah is concerned. The sukkah can incorporate, can absorb and swallow that airspace into itself, and the sukkah has hechsher sukkah. It's included in the shear of zayin al zayin tefachim. That's as far as the sukkah is concerned, as far as the structure. But ve'en yishenim tachtav, you can't sleep beneath it. So although it's part of the sukkah, that airspace has sort of double identity. The sukkah uses him as part of the sukkah, incorporates that airspace into the sukkah, into itself, but a fellow who's actually sitting under that airspace should consider himself out of the sukkah. Ve'en yishenim tachtav, you may not sleep under that airspace, because as far as you're concerned, you're out of the sukkah. You're meant to relate to the sukkah. Ba'sukkah is teishu, shivas yom, you're sitting under airspace. So that explains why the Brisa specifically discussed psal yitzim in a sukkah. Schach pasel in the sukkah, which is considered like the sukkah itself, in which case you could even sleep beneath it, as opposed to describing it as avir in the sukkah, because there you can't actually sleep under that avir. Let's go over to Rashi, 2 lines from the bottom. That's why the Brisa sought to describe the halacha in this manner, that the psal is nidan kesukkah, to tell you a chiddush, the ashminan tana loymar sheishenim tachtav. Dilu avir pachas mishloshim mitzaref l'ashem shir sukkah. It's true that airspace less than 3 is mitzaref to complete the shear of the sukkah. So if you have a 7x7 sukkah and part of it is some airspace less than 3, you have a kosher sukkah. That's as far as the sukkah is concerned. He absorbed that airspace into itself. Avol ein yishenim tachtav. But as far as the personal aspect, you can't sleep beneath that avir because you're considered out of the sukkah. We had a similar concept back on the Fudam base regarding sleeping under a canopy, which isn't really an oil which interferes with the sukkah. It's not going to detract from the shear of sukkah, but you're outside the sukkah. You're not relating to the sukkah. Your personal space is under that canopy. Your personal space is under the open air, under that gap in the schach. Ein yishenim tachtav. It's a big chiddush. Tosfos asks on that. He says, how could you say that when you sit on the airspace, you're not yotze? He says, mi yuchal lizoyer. He's going to be careful. Besukkah malaya nekavim she'ein tzlas. How could you have a perfectly blanketed sukkah? You're going to have some pinhole, some airspace. That's one of the kashas, one of the many kashas that Tosfos asks on Rashi. So the truth is that the Rishonim explain this a bit further. For instance, the Ran learns that it only applies to a large size, significantly sized avir. He says, for instance, the avir which can accommodate roishe v'ruboy of the person. So that's large enough that if a person sitting beneath that it doesn't consider himself in the sukkah. The Rosh learns that we're speaking about an avir which is so significant, it cuts right across, it divides the entire sukkah into 2, so we have to reckon with it. Otherwise, if it's just pockets of air here and there, that's not what the Gemara is speaking about. Okay, let's just summarize before we continue. So we had the halacha psal yitzim in sukkah. We have 4 pshatim. First pshat, we're speaking there's schach and 3 walls, but it's behind the sukkah. And the chiddush there is, even though the mechitzas, according to Tosfos, the schach was not really intended to serve that area, it's okay. Second pshat, you have some schach extending beyond the doorway. So in front of the sukkah, and there's one wall following that schach, and the chiddush is, even though there aren't any really 3 walls there, it's considered an extension of the sukkah and it's kosher. Third pshat, you have a small patch of sunny sukkah. The chiddush is, even though you don't have enough schach there, it's nidan kesukkah. And fourth pshat was, you have a patch in your sukkah with covered with schach pasel, less than 3 tefachim. So chiddush, even though it doesn't have proper schach, is considered part of the sukkah, and in fact you actually sit under that SUKKAH puzzle. Continues the Gemara. How can you say that? Umika midi, the itztarufim itztarif. The Gemara just drew a distinction between SUKKAH puzzle, which is part of the sukkah to the extent that you can actually sit underneath it, and aver, which works differently. Sukkah can have him, but you can't have the aver. You can't sit beneath the aver. How do you make that distinction? Umika midi, the itztarufim itztarif. Do you really find such a thing? Do we have a precedent for such a concept? Something is mitztarif. The airspace is considered part of the shir sukkah. So on the one hand, it's part of the sukkah. And it in itself is not kosher. You can't sit beneath it. How does that work? How can you split the aver into two? He's part of the structure, but as far as the person sitting beneath it, he's considered out of the sukkah. I'll provide an example, a precedent for such a concept by mikveh. Tit hanirik yichiach. I'm going to prove from tit hanirik. It's liquefied mud. Nirik means it can be poured from one kli to the other. So when it's lying in a mikveh, on the one hand, shemitztaref l'abram sa, it's considered part of the 40 sa, the required share of mikveh. So the mikveh has it, absorbs it into the share. But you must make sure, that's the way Tosfos learns, you must make sure not to actually immerse in that tit. As far as you're concerned, you're out of the mikveh. If one is tovel in the actual tit, tefillah is not yaitse. So you have that paradox. On one hand, the mikveh can utilize that tit and include it into the shir mikveh. It's bottled to the mikveh as far as the shir of the mikveh is concerned. But as far as the tovel, you can't be in the tit because then you're out of the mikveh. You have to be in actual water. Here as well says the Gemara, the aver, less than 3, is bottled to the sukkah, so in totality the sukkah has that as part of its shir. It's bottled to the sukkah, but as far as personal space, you must make sure, don't find yourself under that aver, because then you're not going to relate to the sukkah. You have to be in the sukkah itself. Interesting that the Gemara, you may notice the Gemara said we're speaking about a sukkah ketana. Right? The Gemara says you have SUKKAH puzzle. This is around 8 lines from the bottom. SUKKAH puzzle, pachas mishloisha besukkah ketana. That's actually one of the kashas that Tosfos asks in Rashi. Why do we speak about sukkah ketana? Why is this unique to a small sukkah? So actually Tosfos presents a gewaldige chiddush. He says, this whole Gemara is speaking about only a sukkah ketana. So when the sukkah is barely 7 by 7, doesn't allow for much variances, right? Sukkah ketana means if you deduct the avir or the SUKKAH puzzle, there will be nothing left. You won't have the required sufficient shir of sukkah. In that case, says Tosfos, we have this dilemma. So on the one hand, we include the aver or the SUKKAH puzzle into the shir sukkah. The sukkah sort of has him, draws him into itself, but you can't be found under that aver. You're out of the sukkah. But when it comes to sukkah gedola, apparently that's different, says Tosfos. And as far appears to be because a sukkah gedola is already a well-established entity on its own. It's large enough to accommodate all kinds of air gaps and SUKKAH puzzle. It doesn't need it for its shir, in which case we say everything is drawn into the sukkah. So even if a person is sitting under the airspace, he's drawn into the sukkah, which has a shir on its own. So it's a bona fide sukkah, a bona fide makom, which sort of draws everything into it. And even as far as personal space, even if you are sitting under that airspace, the airspace is considered totally part of that sukkah, which already has a shir. So everything is bottled to the sukkah completely, totally, comprehensively. Whether as far as the din of the aver, even as far as the person sitting under the aver, he could consider himself safe and sound inside the sukkah. Continues the Mishnah, Oisa sukkah kim in tzrif. So now he made a sukkah like a tzrif, like a shack, like a tent which has a pointed roof. So there's no horizontal roof. There's no gag, rachav tefach. It's just coming to a point. Or he leaned the SUKKAH against the wall. So he has a wall, and he leans the SUKKAH against the wall. Once again, there's no roof there. Rabbi Yehuda Kessler, Yishayin lo gag, has no roof. They say it's fine even without a roof. Tosfos points out something interesting. He says, where in the sukkah can you sit? So he says, you can sit even under the slant, even when it's less than 10 tefachim high, provided it's 7 by 7. But even if it's less than 10 tefachim high, he says, you know what it's compared to? The psala, it's even a sukkah. Right? According to Rabbi and Rav Yosef, it was referring to a case where the kanim were actually extending past the doorway, only had one doifen. It's an extension of the sukkah. It's part of the sukkah here as well. You have this slant, even under the short side, it's considered part of the sukkah. Interesting chiddush of Tosfos. In any case, we learned that a sukkah without a roof is problematic. It has no gag. And a sukkah is meant to appear like a proper structure, says Rabbi Lezer. And a proper structure has a roof, which shelters the area beneath it, as opposed to just a slanty all-in-one sukkah, whether it's like an overturned V or it's just a straight slant against the wall. So yeah, it's shielding and sheltering the person within it, but it isn't really hovering over the makom. That needs a horizontal surface, which is actually covering and shading and roofing over a makom, which sort of attaches it to that makom. It's affecting the area beneath it. That's a proper structure. That's a proper oil. But something with just slanting in all directions, not creating a gag, says Rabbi Lezer, that's not considered an oil, that's not considered a sukkah. Tana says, the Gemara we learned in the Bryce, there are two cases where Rabbi Lezer will be okay with this slanty sukkah. Why Rabbi Lezer? Shemigbiyav ben akarka tefach. So let's say you have a wall, and schach leaning against that wall on a slant. And he lifted the schach off the floor, a tefach. So you have a tefach gap between schach and floor. The way Rashi learns, we apply lavud. We consider it as if it's filled with a wall. Now you have at least a tefach. You have a wall which is at least a tefach high. So that's your wall, and this is your roof. So shemigbiyim and akarka tefach, you're okay. Oishefligim and akaisel tefach, sheik sher. Or alternatively, he has a wall, and he took his slanted schach and he pulled it away from that wall, at least a tefach. So once again, Rashi learns, we apply lavud, we fill that gap with virtual wall. So now you have a roof. And the slanted schach is his wall. So this way it's kasha. Tosfos learns he actually filled it with some wall material. In any case, as long as you have something, at least a tefach, that's okay, to present itself as an oil, as a proper structure. My time, why do Rabbanon allow even a slanted sukkah, shipua, ahalim, kahalim, damu? Slanted, ahalim are considered like an oil. You don't need a flat roof. So according to our version, Rabbi Lezer says it needs to have a flat roof. Chacham say even a slanted oil is okay. It says there was a story involving Abaye, who was Ashkeche. He noticed Rabbi Yosef, the Kagana Begilas Chasanim Sukkah. You remember Kilas Chasanim? That was the canopy which was put up for the Chasan. Now this Kilas Chasanim didn't have a flat roof. It came to a point. And Rabbi Yosef was sleeping underneath that canopy in a sukkah, apparently, because he didn't consider a Kilas Chasanim to be an oil, because it doesn't have a flat roof. Amalei, so Abaye asks him, Kaman, whose shit are you following? Who doesn't consider this to be an oil? Kaman, Rabbi Lezer? Just as Rabbi Lezer says, a slanted sukkah is nothing, so a slanted kila is nothing and won't interfere with the sukkah, right? So you follow Rabbi Lezer? Shafkas Rabbanon, you abandoned the Rabbanon, who consider a slanted oil as an oil, but Avdis Rabbi Lezer, you follow Rabbi Lezer, you don't have to do that. Why do you abandon the Rabbin and follow the Yachid? Amalei, so Rabbi Yosef responds, Bryce Ifchatani. You know why? Because in the Bryce, the names were reversed. The Rabbanon are the ones that don't like the slanted roof. And I'm following the Rabbanon. It's not an oil. Bryce Ifchatani. Rabbi Lezer machshir, hachamim paisli. So in fact, I was following the Rabbin. Chacham are the ones who say a slanted sukkah is not a sukkah. And likewise, a slanted canopy is not an oil, so it won't interfere with a proper sukkah. So Abaye asks him, Shafkas Masnis, and you abandoned the Mishnah's version of events, Va'avdis K'Brais, and you followed the Brais, I'm going to do so. Amalei Masnis Nechidoi, Ave Kabbalah, the Mishnah was presented by a Yachid, It's an opinion presented by an individual, meaning the prevalent and accepted version of the machlekes was the way the Brisa presents it. The Rabbanan are the ones who hold a slanted roof is not considered. The Mishnah, which presents it differently in the reverse, is a different shita. It's a yachad desanya. He made a sukkah like a shack, pointed roof, or he leaned the schach against the wall. Rabbi Nassan Omer, so you see it's Rabbi Nassan presenting it. Rabbi Lezer Paisa, Hashem lo gag, chav machshir. So Rabbi Nassan was the one who presented our Mishnah. Rabbi Lezer does not consider it a sukkah, and Chacham do. But in reality, the correct version is the Brisa's version, which was the commonly accepted version of the machlekes, where the shitas are actually reversed. Chacham don't consider it an oil, so sukkah presented in this manner is puzzle, and likewise the canopy, which has a pointed roof, is not considered an oil and won't interfere with his sukkah, and that's whose shita I was following. Says the Mishnah, machzelas kanim. So machzelas is a mat made of kanim, of bamboos, of reeds, and theoretically it can serve two purposes. L'shchiva, to be used as a mattress, to lie on it, to sit on it, or l'sichach, to use as a canopy, provide shelter and shade. Now, if it's meant l'shchiva, then it's a kli. Kabal tumah can't be used for schach. If it was produced for sichuch purposes, then it's not a kli. It can be used for schach. So machzelas kanim g'dola. You have a large size reed mat. The Ran says large means larger than required for personal use. So what's the halacha? It says the Mishnah also l'shchiva. If he produced it with the intent to use it for shchiva, for lying, for a mattress, mikabelas tumah. It has tumah capability because it's a kli. Ein mesachim, it can't be used for schach. It's a kli. L'sichach. If it was meant for schach, then it's not a kli. Mesachichin ba can be used for schach. Ve'ein mikabelas tumah. It's not dependent on size, whether it's small or big. It has the same halach. Also, shchiva was meant for shchiva, mekabelas tumah, then it's a kli, it's mekabel tumah. Ve'ein mesachichin ba, can't be used for schach. However, if it was meant l'sichuch, then it's not a kli. Mesachichin ba can be used for schach. Ve'ein mekabelas tumah. Says the Gemara Gufa Kasha. Let's go back to Tanakama, which is a bit confusing. The wording are inherently difficult to understand, because first you say Amris asala shchiva, you take a large size mat, which was produced for shchiva, mekabelas tumah ve'ein mesachim ba, right? It's a kli, it's mekabel tumah, you can't use it for schach. Apparently, taima the asala shchiva, it's only because it was produced for that with that in mind. It was earmarked for shchiva. Hastama. Apparently, you can imply from here that if it was just stama, meaning it was not earmarked for any specific use, it was unspecified, then we could justly assume that it's l'sichach. Unless he specifically had shchiva in mind, let's assume that the large size mat was meant for shade and shelter, and it's not a kli, and it's fine. That's the first part of the Mishnah. Then continues the Mishnah. V'ada tani l'sichach masachin ba. If it was meant for sichach, meaning he specifically expressed his intent to use this for sichach, was produced with that in mind, then you could use it. We have a diuk. Tama the asal is sichach. That's only because it was earmarked specifically for sichach. Hastama l'shchiva. Apparently, if it was undefined and unspecified, then we have to assume to be choishish, it was meant for lying purposes, for sleeping, for kli. So what's the halach of stama? There's a stiruth in the Mishnah. First part of the Mishnah seems to say that stama is okay. Only if there was specific machshav for shchiva, then it's a kli. But if it was left undefined, unspecified, we can assume that it was meant for schach. Then we have the next part of the Mishnah, which seems to say the other way around. If he specifically produced it for sichach, then it's okay. But otherwise, if it's just stama, undefined, unearmarked, then we have to assume it's the shchiva. The answer is very simple. It depends what size mat we're speaking about. Kam b'gdoila, kam b'ktana. The reisha of the Mishnah, which says that stama is okay, speaking about a large size mat, which is presumed to have been produced for schach. Why would he produce a large size mat for personal use? Kam b'ktana. The Seifa, which seems to say that stama is presumed to be for shchiva, speaking about a small size mat, personal size. So unless it indicates otherwise, we assume it's the shchiva. So if there was explicit intention, one way or the other, there's no question. If it was meant l'shchiva, it's tamei. Meant l'sichach, it's fine. The question is by a stama. So the Gemara depends on the size. A large one is assumed to be good, a small one not. Continues the Gemara, let's skip over the parentheses. Let's proceed to the next part of the Mishnah. Irrelevant of size. The halacha is like this. Also l'shchiva, kabbalas tumah. If he produced it for shchiva, then it's makabel tumah. Let's stop for a second. What does this imply? Tamad asal shchiva. It's only because it was earmarked for shchiva. But if it's undefined, we assume it's fine and good for sichach. That's the first part of Rabbi Lezer. Ema Sefer. Let's proceed to the next part of Rabbi Lezer, which we have a diak going the other way. Rabbi Lezer says asal sichach. If you made it for schach, yeah, then it's okay. Then it's fine. What does this imply? Time of the asal sichach. That's why because he did it l'sichach. He had a specific intention for sichach. Hastam l'shchiva. Apparently, if it was left undefined, unspecified, we have to assume it's l'shchiva. Now, here you can't say that it's size dependent, because Rabbi Lezer clearly says that he's addressing both sizes simultaneously. Right? We have an inherent contradiction within his words regarding the status of a stam mat. So now we're stuck. So the Gemara will elaborate further. I'm going to have several approaches to explain the Mishnah. Perhaps we should leave it for tomorrow. Okay, so let's just recap today's daf. We discussed a case of a sukkah which was enclosed within an achsadra, within this overhang within the courtyard. Abai says it works, Rabbi says it doesn't. We had one version which was that we're trying to rely on pitik riyad v'soisim, which is a virtual machitza. Abai says it's okay, Rabbi says no, because the pitik are serving the roofed area and not the area outside it. According to the second version, by pitik will agree you can't apply it to the sukkah, because it's not really a tangible machitza. The question applied to lavud. That's a chiddush. And Abai says it works, and Rava says even by lavud, it can only serve the intended area, which is the area of the achsadra, not the sukkah. The Gemara says halach kalishna kama, which is that lavud is considered like a tangible machitza, and even Rava would agree that it works. We go back to the first lashon. It's a question of pitikra, which isn't really a tangible machitza, and there we follow Rava's shita, which is that it cannot be applied to the sukkah. So bottom line is, if you have a real machitza, a solid physical machitza, of course it can apply in all directions. Whereas if you have a lavud, according to the maskana, that's as good as a good machitza. By pitikra, by machlekes, and Rava maintains, at least by sukkah, it's not going to create the dira of the sukkah, since it wasn't really positioned for that purpose. The Brisa spoke about a psala yitzim in a sukkah, which is part of the sukkah, and you can sit there. We have four pshatim. Either we're speaking some sort of protrusion to the backside of the sukkah, and the chiddush was, even though the mechitzas or the schach were not intended for that area. Second pshat was you have some schach extending beyond the entranceway of the sukkah, and you have one wall going along with it. And the chiddush is even one wall is enough. We spoke about a possibility of part of a sukkah being full of sunlight, chamam rubim etzel. Still, it's incorporated in the sukkah and it's kosher. And the final pshat was you have schach pas less than 3 tefachim. So although you don't have schach kosher, it's considered part of the sukkah to the extent that you can actually sit under that schach pasel. Whereas when it comes to avir, even if it's less than 3 tefachim, you're not meant to sit under that avir. And the Rishonim and the Ramah actually brings la halacha, provided that it's a significantly sized pocket of airspace, it can accommodate rosh v'ruba of a person, or the way the Rush puts it, it cuts right across the sukkah, so it has added chashivas. Now, lach l'maisa, when it comes to sitting under schach pasel, so if we speak about a large sized sukkah, where the shear of schach pasel to be placed on the sukkah is, it needs to be at least 4 tefachim, so the Machais Rishonim some learn that if it's less than 4 tefachim, you can actually sit underneath it as well. It's different than Avir, where you sort of find yourself out of the sukkah. You're uncovered and exposed. When it comes to schach pasel, you consider yourself part of the sukkah, even though it's schach pasel, provided it's less than 4 tefachim. And according to some Rishonim, you only have up until 3 tefachim. It's beyond 3 tefachim, then you may not sit under it. So it's dafka if it's less than the shir lovet of 3 tefachim. Both shitas are brought in the halacha. Okay, we concluded with the sukkah, which doesn't really have a flat roof, and we had the Mishnah's version where Rabbi Lezer does not consider it an oil, and the Chachamim do. We had another version of the Brisa, which actually switched around the shitas. We concluded with the mat, large, small. So if it's done l'shchiva, then of course it's makabatuma, it can be for schach. If it was specifically done for sichach, it can work. By a stama, we actually started the discussion. We'll continue Be'ez Hashem tomorrow. Kol tov to you and Hatzlacha Rabbah.